Welcome to this KCB podcast. My name is Neil McWilliams, and I'm a lecturer and programme leader here at KCB, and I've been involved in delivering the CGI courses for over 35 years. So here at KCB, I lead the classes for the corporate governance module.
Hi everybody, I am Buff Cooper and I lead the lectures at KCB for development of strategy and risk management. Now Neil and I live in the same village in Surrey and we regularly meet up in our local coffee shop Adriano's, where we discuss all things CGI students. Now, during our last few chats over a coffee, we've been discussing the key factors involved in passing the CGI examinations, and we thought it would be a good idea to deliver this over a couple of podcasts. In our first podcast, Neil covered Part 1 exams, and during this second podcast, I will be focusing on the Part 2 exams. Joining us today, we have academic royalty, Jess Riches, who was a double award winner in the November 24 exam sitting. We'll be talking to Jess about her exam success later in the podcast. Now, Neil, I think there were several areas you covered in the podcast for Part 1 exams that also apply to the success for passing the Part 2 exams. So let's kick off by briefly revisiting these.
Yeah, thanks, Buff. So that first ingredient in passing the CGI exams is that strong knowledge and understanding across the syllabus. Now, this can be very tough, especially with the volume of learning required. But syllabus knowledge is often required by students as the only factor in passing the examination. So students focus all of their efforts in just learning that study text. And that's a big mistake because students really need to balance learning the knowledge with other factors. But I believe that, and I set out in the first podcast, that there's two types of memory, that short-term memory and the long-term memory. And to perform on the examination day, the majority of knowledge needs to come from your long-term memory.
Yeah, Neil, absolutely. The importance of that long-term memory is absolutely key. In my first weekly sessions with strategy and risk students, I talk about the importance of layered learning and starting this process as soon as possible. And when I say layered learning, I refer to the learning curve discovered by psychologist Hermann Ebbinghaus. What he formalized was the understanding that if you learn something new, the majority of that is lost in your memory after about a week. However, if you revisit that material in the next few days, then that reinforces the earlier learning and takes your long-term memory retention to a higher level, say 20%. The more you repeat the process, the higher the learning curve moves up and the higher percentage you can recall. In my weekly lessons, I create 4 layers of learning week on week. The first layer, we discuss new material in the session. The second layer, within the next week, students review the study text and slides to reaffirm their knowledge learnt in the session. The third layer, they complete the homework that is set, which is a previous exam question. And the fourth layer, in the following session, we recap on the material from the previous session and review the model answer for the homework. We discuss what students did well and, of course, what they didn't do well in the homework. Now, towards the end of the 10-week course, students are tasked to mark other students' homework. This introduces another layer in the process and ensures they understand the mindset of the examiner. It also means there are no surprises on exam day and they know exactly what to expect and how to approach answering questions.
Yeah. Great approach, Buff. And absolutely the best way of getting knowledge into your long-term memory is through continually reaffirming that knowledge over that sustained period up until the exam. Listen, trying to cram that knowledge in the weeks immediately ahead of exam just won't work.
So now listen, we talked in the previous podcast, the 40-20-40 approach you developed for CGI exam preparation that all the lecturers at KCB use.
Yeah. So, as you know, we use the 40-20-40 model whereby we spend 40% of our time developing and testing our knowledge, 20% of our time developing that deeper understanding of the knowledge and how it may be tested in the exam. And finally, we commit that 40% of our time to practicing examination questions.
And what's really important here to notice is what Neil's talking about there, that we place as much importance on the learning, the content, as we do for exam practice. So let's recap on the second factor to examination success, Neil.
Yeah, so that second important factor is the application of the knowledge to the examination question. So that is, it's more than just answering the question that is set, because students often ignore the question about it set and just write a generic answer on what they've learned about that subject area. So where scenarios or case studies are given in the exam question, these are points and signposts that are being made by the examiner for you to consider. Some very, very important part of the answer.
Yeah, and when we look at part 2 exams, students have to answer 3 out of 4 questions in part A. Now, this accounts for 75% of the student's final mark. These questions are based around a detailed case study, which is typically 3 to 4 pages long. This means that the case study linkage in your answer is critical to your overall final grade. Now, I believe that depending on the question, there is between 15 to 30% of the marks available for linking your your answer to the case study. Now, this means that overall the case study linkage in your part A questions could amount to 20% of your final grade overall. That's really significant. And in my view, poor case study linkage is one of the largest contributing factors to failing a part 2 exam.
Yeah, absolutely, Buff. So look, then there's that third and final factor, which I know, Buff, is your favorite subject: examination technique.
Yeah, thanks, Neil. I've developed a 12-step process for tackling part 2 exams. I introduced this starting with the June 24 exams, and I'm over the moon how successful it's been with the last 2 prize winners in risk management and the strategy prize winner in November 24. The 12-step process is basically a checklist to follow for constructing an answer to a part 2 exam question. This 12 steps takes the student from introduction to conclusion and everything in between. This ensures that the students provide a well-structured answer and ensures that none of the marker's requirements are overlooked and they can score the highest possible mark. Now, this is a good time to bring in Jess Richards. For the November 24 exam sitting, Jess won the Ernest Clark Award for the highest mark in risk management and also the Ralph Bell Prize for the qualifying student with the highest mark across all modules. Welcome, Jess.
Hello, thank you very much for inviting me to join your podcast. What a lovely introduction.
You're well deserved, Jess, and it's our pleasure. We are really pleased to have you here and tell us all about your thoughts regarding your exam. So firstly, let's talk about your mental approach to your part 2 exam.
Oh, the mental approach was absolutely fundamental for me. Buff, during your revision weekend, you made a comment saying that we really needed to take control of the exam and not let the exam control us. And that really resonated with me and helped me shift my thought process and approaches to the exam. So it really helped me stay calm and focused in the exam. And that combined with the 12-step structure just really helped me go into that exam with the right mindset. So using your 12-step plan in the 15 minutes allocated reading time at the beginning, I wrote that down on the first sheet of paper and then chose my questions and then planned my answers against that. So that gives you the good structure and the bare bones basically to hang your answer on throughout the whole exam sitting.
Jess, thanks for that. That's really important to hear that. So listen, what about the importance of the case study? What I describe to the students as the Willy Wonka golden ticket. To me, it's just a freebie because it's released 5 weeks before the exam. And this gives the student plenty of time to research the industry the company is in and focus on subject areas that are clearly signposted in the case study.
Yeah, absolutely. And as you just said earlier, you could get up to 20-30% of your marks just by linking the case study. So that could take your answer into pass mark territory. So it's so important to really become familiar with the case study and all the issues that the examiner is signposting towards you. I printed out that case study. I kept it on my bedside table. I'd read it before I went to bed in the morning. I also remember one afternoon reading it out loud to my 5-year-old in a bit of a funny way, just to try and bring it to life. And as you said, that 40% of really testing and improving your knowledge and understanding. Just a funny way of doing that. And then otherwise I spent a lot of time reading annual reports from similar companies just to really understand the risk profile and landscape in that exam. And then, not to be obviously overlooked is the revision weekend. the guest speaker that you arranged, Buff, that was just really helpful in just, bringing the real risks in that case study to life, because, you never know what you take into your mind and pops up in the exam when you're in the moment. So case study and case study linkage, absolutely critical.
Thanks, Jess. Jess, I love the story about you reading it to your 5-year-old. My only concern is whether we actually corporate governance, we've scarred them for life. But but Jess, I think that we've talked about your mental approach to that and your familiarity. But just what about the timings in the exam? So, what's the importance of getting that right?
So important. So when I said earlier about, not letting the exam control you and you being in the driving seat, timing is so critical to that, because, when you've done your plan, and if you're suddenly 10 minutes over on one question, you're not calm anymore. You're getting stressed. You're worried. You start to panic. And then when you start to panic, you don't think clearly, and then you start to go off tangents. And then you can quickly see how, a well-prepared student, it can quickly unravel in the exam. So, the 12-step program with that is, at 38 minutes, you stop and then you move on. And by doing that gave me enough time to build up a good buffer to review my answers against my plan and add things, which I did do actually. When I got to the end of the exam, I had about 10-15 minutes left to spare, and I did go back through review and notice a few things that I had missed out just in the heat of the exam, and I was able to pop those back in. So timing, absolutely. And how lovely to finish an exam, actually finish it rather than it just vanishing on the screen in front of you, never to be seen again. Yeah.
Jess, that is so brilliant to hear, and the fact you just bailed out at 38 minutes on every single question. And fantastic. Yeah, time management is number one for me when it comes to exam technique. If you only answer 3/4 of the paper, then the pass mark suddenly goes up from 50% to 60%, 67%. So you're just making it harder and harder for yourself. It's really important that you complete all the questions using good time management. So Jess, tell us about your approach to exam revision.
Yeah, absolutely. And just actually one more bit to add on the timing, if I can. In the revision weekend, Buff, you talked a lot about the law of diminishing returns.
Yes, I did.
You're just writing because, if you're trying to recite the textbook, but actually you're not scoring any points. And that's where that 38 minutes, comes in, because you get your bulk of your points through the end.
Yeah, you're
top
just
half of the question.
You've already scored enough marks at 38 minutes, haven't you? You've at least passed if you've done a good answer. And on that law of diminishing returns, I mean, me and Neil are going to do a podcast about exam technique in a week's time. I think that's really important. That law of diminishing returns is just because you know a subject really, really well, don't keep on writing about it. Get on to the next question. Sorry, Jess, carry on. I interrupted.
Yeah, absolutely. So my approach to revision, I did a good plan, and I really stuck to it and made sure my revision was really focused. I looked at the CGI past exam questions and model answers and sort of practiced answering those using the 12-step approach. They're a really good, useful revision tool, but I think it's also just important to remember that it's not the only way of answering the question. So when I looked at the risk management and model answers, the examples that the examiner gave there were different to some of the examples that I gave, but that doesn't mean there's only one version of the truth of answering it. So, use it as a good revision aid, but don't become too bogged down and thinking that that's the only way to answer those questions. Otherwise, I found the revision weekend, really useful. The mock questions that you made for us, Buff, they were great because they were actually based on the case study, which obviously you don't get with the case study looking back at the previous CGI exams. And focusing on the chapter summaries, because, as you've both already said, it's impossible to learn all of the content, remember it, and it's a waste of time just trying to do that. Like, you just really need to make sure that you're comfortable with the key concepts, the key definitions, and the chapter summaries kind of really help sort of bring those to life. And then just the social side, quite often it might be overlooked, but I find that just as important. So through the KCB evening class and revision, weekend. There's a WhatsApp group that helped me, make connections, expand my network. There's colleagues who I met in the corporate governance exam, who I'm still in touch with now, and just that forum to share knowledge, ideas, resources, fears and frustrations was just invaluable, because it helps making, a remote distance learning process feel a lot more supported. In my sort of sub-revision group, shall we call it, away from the KCB one, we joked about developing a hive mind for the risk management exam, because we just spent so much time talking mainly about your 12-step approach, actually, Buff, towards the end, and how to do that, and practicing answering questions as a group. So helps you just feel a bit more bolstered going into the exam, for sure. But you need to be in the KCB class, obviously, to get the benefit of the group, to meet these people.
Oh, thanks. Thanks, Jen. And I love, I think you're absolutely right about that social network and the importance of collaborative learning. So Jess, we spoke earlier about the syllabus knowledge, and you did this great a story of corporate governance we chat. But what other approaches did you use in developing that knowledge?
Yeah, absolutely. So the syllabus knowledge, is important, because that's ultimately the examiner's looking for you to have that knowledge to pass the exam. But I just, as I said earlier, just really sort of re-emphasize to myself, it's not a memory test. It's not just writing down what you know from the textbook. And knowing that there's more than one ways to answer the question, actually, which I think is what you might have said to me originally, Neil, in the corporate governance revision weekend, that there's not one version of the truth. It's about, there's no really any wrong answers. It's just taking the key concepts and what and applying it to the question. And also going back to sort of the calm, balanced mindset, and combining that with the risk management or the syllabus knowledge, is just remembering that we're governance professionals, and the exam is an opportunity to show the examiner what we know, and that we're worthy of getting this qualification, and using short, concise sentences, and making sure that there's a point to what you're writing that shows the examiner your knowledge. It shows that you've read the question and you're answering it. It makes it easy for them to give you marks, and to all achieve our goal of ultimately qualifying at the end of the long process.
Brilliant, Jess. Yeah, I think writing style is so important, isn't it? I talk about crisp, nice, short sentences make it easier for the examiner to award you marks. So, Jess, what other aspects of the 12 steps do you feel led to your exam being so successful? I mean, things like the introduction to set the tone, and the conclusion to bring everything to a purpose. I talked a lot about that, and also making bold recommendations. If you could just talk about those sort of things, and anything else in the 12 steps that you thought was very beneficial.
Yeah, absolutely. So first, isn't it, it's reading the question and looking at what looking for the answer the examiner wants from you. So I started with each one with almost a conclusion executive summary. So writing down, what my recommendations were going to be, basically what my conclusion was, and then working backwards to then tailor the content to the recommendations that I'm, leading the examiner to with my answer. So the conclusion, is really, key for the tone, the intro and the conclusion to that. And then also actually just remembering some of the easy marks, like, recommending the use of an expert or a real life example. I mean, the case study comes out so far in advance. There's plenty of time to have a look at similar situations, and just tailoring that into your answer, just to get a few easy marks.
Absolutely, and thank you, Jen. And just that, the point that you're making there, that ultimately, your exam is going to be marked by the examiner, who is a human, right? And they just enjoy reading good answers, right? That they can award mark. In my opinion, they're willing you to pass the exam. So really, really important to be gifting them those opportunities.
Yeah, as I say, make it an enjoyable read for the marker, and writing style is so important. Do it well, as we mentioned earlier, make it enjoyable and make it easy to mark. Before we move on, I just want to mention quickly about the level Jess, that students need to write at to score well in the exam. Now, we need to understand the Part 1 exams are what they call level 7 at the UK Academic Regulated Qualifications Framework. And this is at a bachelor's degree level. But when you're writing answers for Part 2 exams, these are at level 7 or at master's degree level. And students here are required to have a deep critical level of thinking and to create new content. This is at the top level of what they call the Bloom's taxonomy, and requires creative thinking and not just regurgitating knowledge. What do you think about that, Jess?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, as we've said sort of throughout the podcast, it's not about writing down something that someone else has already said. It's applying that theory to the case study, not repeating the book, and just, becoming familiar with the case study, especially for the risk management exam, the risk profile and the risk landscape, and bringing that into your answers. It's just going to set you apart from other candidates in the exam, and it's going to show the examiner that you know what you're talking about. Absolutely. And keeping sentences concise. Just because it's a level 7 doesn't mean that, more words isn't always better. Like, the more words you put into a sentence, you risk yourself going off tangents and losing focus. Short, punchy, concise sentences with a point that's relevant to what you're trying to say. That's how you're going to show the examiner that you mean business and you know what you're talking about.
I like that, mean business.
Absolutely. Well, listen, Jess, first of all, thank you. Thank you so much for joining us today. Your contribution has been really, really insightful. We know the theory of how to pass an exam, but hearing it from you today has just been really, really good. So thank you so much.
Thank you for having me.
Oh, thank you. So just to finish, then just to recap on those 3 factors: ensuring the knowledge of the syllabus and continue to reaffirm that, getting it into your long-term memory, learning to apply knowledge correctly to the exam, and ensuring your examination technique is strong and that you've practiced previous exams so there's no surprise on the day.
Thank you, Jess. Thank you for giving up your time today. And it's been a real pleasure to listen to you. And thanks, Neil, as always. So listen, in our next podcast, we will be chatting to former KCB student Sital Anand. We will be covering the importance of the human factors that need full consideration before you embark on a journey of CGI studies. I hope you enjoyed this podcast. Thanks again, Jess and Neil, and we'll see you on the next one.